Before we launch into this, I want to frame the professional point of view with a little thought experiment. And so you can close your eyes for this or you can keep them wide open, but here's the idea. Imagine if in the 1940s there was a conference called Suburbanism Next to explore how to harness the impacts of three big things. Returning veterans from World War II who are about to get a whole bunch of low-interest loans from the Veterans Administration, the construction of a national freeway system, and re-amping up the mass production of automobiles after a downturn during World War II. Imagine what we could have done if we had been intentional about creating livable, equitable cities. Well, you saw what happened with that idea. And again, imagine if in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, there was a conference or a movement to explore the impacts of streetcars, railroads, and this new technology called automobiles on cities and society. Maybe it was called Mobility Next, I don't know. But maybe we could have held off the demise of public transit several decades later. As you know, the story, General Motors, Standard Oil, and Firestone tires colluded to tear up all the public transportation infrastructure in America. They were found guilty of collusion by the federal government and fined the princely sum of $1 for their transgression. So if you want to, I was glad to hear about your book on Detroit. If you want to ride old Detroit streetcars, go to Mexico City because that's where they ended up. And you know, for many of these eras, imagine the same period after the Middle Ages, maybe it was called colonialism next. We could have thought about what the future might have been if we had been more intentional. So such events and movements, had they been harnessed properly, could have actually altered the course of history. But as we know, just from hindsight and from history, capitalism has a way of kind of upending the cost benefits of things. And in the absence of intervention, we'll just do what it always does. So if we're successful in doing what we should do with Urbanism Next, we may be able to alter the course of history from what it might end up being to something much more intentional. And that's what I believe our professions, planning, design, development, engineering, what have you, these are the endeavors that make us uniquely human, the ability to actually plan, think, be rational, and possibly even predict, although not always accurately, what the future may be. So I keep asking myself, is this the moment, that technology moment? Remember a few years ago when everyone had smartphones and we're thinking about telecommuting, and we were foreseeing the demise of convention centers like this, meetings like this, and even cities themselves, because everybody would just be working in rural Idaho and having a good old time out in nature? Or is this a moment like the advent of the automobile, which truly was completely transformational to society? I think the lessons and the words that we've heard suggest that it's probably the latter, that we're at a really transformational moment. And so these things like autonomous mobility, e-commerce, the sharing economy, I would suggest the trust economy, the circular economy to be thrown in there, really are going to affect the way we move about, the way we work, the way we live, work, and play, and build. And so this is a magic moment, I think, for all of us. And if indeed, as somebody said at the conference, if infrastructure is destiny, then it really is up to the planning and design professions. We're going to be challenged like never before to make sense of this emerging technology and figure out what its impact is on the physical, the social, and the ecological environment. So my own opinion, and I always hate moderating because I would rather be on this panel, so I'm going to get my biases out first. I think we're going to have to be, as all of our professions, much more attuned to systems design, to collaboration, and the ability to work on adaptive, open-ended, wicked problems whose solutions are less obvious than ever before. But my hope, our hope, ought to be for our children and those generations that as they look back at this moment, and maybe they're going to be at a conference like Colonizing Mars Next or Floating Cities Next, given climate change, I'm hopeful that they're going to say, boy, that generation nailed it. And they really set us up to be successful. And so with that as a frame, what I would like to do to each of you is just have introduce yourself and talk about your profession, your practice within the profession now as it is. And then after that, we're going to go down and I'm going to ask you where you think it's going to be going. But it's important to set the baseline of kind of where you are now. So why don't we start with Chris?
Yeah, so Chris Zahas, again, at Leland Consulting Group. We're a real estate economics and strategic planning firm based here in Portland, but we work almost nationally. I would say right now I feel a little bit frustrated sometimes because a lot of the work that we do, probably 3/4 of which is for public sector clients, planning assignments, downtown plans, TOD plans, is that we're not integrating this radical change yet. It's a lot of business as usual. There's a little bit of talk here and there, but we haven't really integrated it. And so because the how to integrate it is such a can of worms of policy and DOT rules and funding rules that it's so much more complex than just doing a plan. But I'm very excited, and I'm an optimist. If you were in our workshop yesterday, I'm an optimist about this, and I think we're going to hit the utopia, not the dystopia outcome. I think what's needed, or what the opportunity is, that by quote unquote solving some of the automobile related challenges that we have here in not just America but in the world, that we've created this paradigm, is that I see it as an opportunity to sort of strip away that complexity, and that really leaves us with an opportunity to focus on actual true urbanism and creating great places. That's really the fundamental, and by solving some of those other challenges, I think it creates great opportunities. I think it also creates great challenges for those areas that were designed around the automobile. If you take that away, what's left? There's not a lot of framework to build on, so there's a lot of hard work to be done. But I think at the same time it's very inspiring.
Yeah, great. David, why don't we just go down this way?
Sure. David Piskauskas, principal at 1100 Architect in New York. 1100 is a mid-size design firm. We have 2 locations, one's in New York and one's in Frankfurt, Germany. So altogether we're about 70 people. What I would offer as one of our largest and most significant concerns right now, we work a lot in the public sector, a lot in the private sector, across ranges of markets, private homes to community-based buildings. We're really making a conscious effort to think about how we're training our young people. They are certainly more digitally fluent than myself and my partner, who've been at this now 35 years. I know what the software is capable of. I see one of my jobs as a senior leader to help our employees and our team members and our collaborators become better collaborators and better at understanding complexities within problems, and not necessarily accepting the very first answer. One of the things that we look for is the ability to look around corners, and I think that's part of what all of us are faced with today, is to be able to see what we can't already see but know is there. So together with that, we're trying to inspire young architects. I enjoyed some conversations last evening with some of you, that the future's bright, the future's challenging, it's complex, and the more interactive work you do across the multiple disciplines, I think the more rewards you'll have and the more rewards you'll give society.
Thanks, Tim. And I guess I was lucky because I got to be both a moderator and a panelist. So I get to play both roles.
Yeah, so you won the lottery.
Yeah, now I have the APA hat, and I'll start by saying this has been a focus for APA, actually going back to 2015 or 2014, when then President Bill Anderson from AECOM appointed a Smart Cities and Sustainability Task Force, which has been looking at a range of issues related to smart cities technology. and sustainability. And over the last couple of years, we've really focused in on autonomous vehicles, and it's actually been my personal background. Again, I'm a planning practitioner. I've been research director coming on 5 years, but also a landscape architect by training. So my thing is green infrastructure and the urban forest. So if anything, so I never thought I would be spending so much time on this topic. Literally 75% of my time now has been recently devoted to autonomous vehicles because of the issue, the secondary impacts. Planners need to be at the forefront of dealing with those. And I think the good news is I see the planning profession and our members, I'm not saying all 38,000 members, all planners and communities, but there's really a lot of interest and eagerness to step up and take on this challenge, which I agree with what folks have said. And I'll say one last point in these remarks at the beginning is that we have developed a whole suite of resources on this topic, including a knowledge base collection, a report that came out of a symposium we did last fall with National League of Cities, Brookings, and others, and policy principles, and which our legislative and policy principle, committee developed, and that's available for our website, through our website, free to everyone, not just members, www.planning.org. But don't go there this morning because apparently the website is down and they're working on it. But later on, when you go back, go, because I think it's some really good resources.
Mary, landscape architecture.
Landscape architecture. For a second, I thought you were going to.
No, I'm not stealing your thought.
So I work for Alta Planning and Design. We are primarily a transportation firm. My job within landscape architecture is probably different. It's probably about maybe 5% of the profession, I would say. I think a lot of folks are really focused on the urban design, and that part will be affected greatly by autonomous vehicles and TNCs. But most of my work is actually within the right-of-way. And I'm on the design side of Alta Planning plus Design. So our work, and my work as a landscape architect is really, it always has been putting people first. So this conference has been really reaffirming and very heartwarming for me to hear so many different presentations that have said essentially if we're putting people first in what we're doing, then we're doing the right thing. Our job at Alta, and I think our job as landscape architects, is to try to create an environment where people can move from point A to point B safely, no matter what age, what ability. I think as a profession, we welcome this new era. We welcome the new technology. We're always interested in seeing how many different things we can squeeze out of our rights-of-way. Our projects typically are in road rights-of-way or railroad rights-of-way, or areas where we're trying to squeeze in and fit in and elbow in as many things as possible, whether it's additional infrastructure, additional technology. I think we're very well ready for the next challenge.
Great. So this is we're very fortunate that we have a bunch of folks up here who are actually thinking about these things already. So now the question is, you've got a whole bunch of clients out here, you've got potential collaborators, you have a whole bunch of students out here. What are our professions going to be like in the future? So put yourself 10, 20 years in the future. I'm going to start with you, Mary. So what is landscape? How are you going to be working differently? What's the profession going to? Is there even going to be a profession?
Oh, I think definitely for landscape architecture. I can't speak for everybody else. Where we are seeing more and more people looking for experience over product. Our role, I think, is going to be really key into helping create those experiences, creating places that people want to be, where they want to spend time, helping people get from point A to point B, looking at, just from where we've come from and where we're headed, that heaven to hell scenario. that everybody's talking about, and the WALL-E slides that I think I saw in several presentations, we know that as a culture, especially in America, we are not the healthiest. We are looking at potential futures where we could be traveling around in our personal little pods. And I think especially with our profession, we're going to be fighting that. We're going to be looking for even more ways to get people out of vehicles altogether, getting people out walking, biking, exercising, enjoying the sun, enjoying the air, enjoying the health benefits of being around trees and in a natural environment. As far as what kind of tech we're going to be dealing with in the future, we're going to be looking at ways to hide technology, I think, honestly.
Do you say hide?
Hide technology, looking
Hide
for ways to hide all those sensor boxes that are going to be talking to autonomous vehicles, looking for ways to put micro hydro, in the stormwater below the surface of the ground.
Can you do a better job than with cell phone towers that look like
Or dumpsters.
redwood trees?
Yeah, the bad trees in LA. I hope so. I hope so. But I think that will be part of our job. Will be trying to create as much nature as possible in a more increasingly urban environment.
Okay. Anyone else want to take a stab?
Yeah, sure. And I actually majored in history many decades ago as an undergraduate. So I'm going to pick up on your historic theme. I'm actually going to go back to the 19th century when I think landscape architecture, planning, and public health were the same profession. Frederick Law Olmsted was our first Surgeon General, you can say. He was the executive secretary of the Sanitary Commission back in during the Civil War. And I think what's happened, there's been so much siloization and specialization through the 20th century, and I think everyone recognizes the need now to break down the silos, to collaborate across sectors, across professions, and to tie that to planning and landscape architecture. I think it's a real opportunity for planners. And what planners have struggled with is demonstrating the value of planning. So when you think of municipal budgets, what's one of the first things that gets cut during a recession? That's planning. And it's like, it's so intangible, hard to explain, but I think there's a real opportunity now for planners to step up and exercise leadership as conveners, as facilitators, as collaborators. So I think the future is bright for the planning profession. And we have, either it's a technological juggernaut, I've heard people say, that's going to steamroll us over. It doesn't have to be that way. It doesn't have to be the way it was with the automobile after post-World War II. We have tools, we have resources, we have thought leaders, and we can deal with it. So 20 years from now, I hope the planning profession, working with our sister professions, is in the leadership role and helping communities sustain their values and goals.
Great. David, architecture.
So where we think we're going is to a higher level of and more elevated commitment to social awareness that's working on behalf of communities and civic organizations. I think as we continue to focus on the interpersonal engagement of place, we're talking about the primacy of equity. There's perhaps there's an announcement this morning while we were all sitting here that the 2018 Pritzker Prize, which is the preeminent prize in the field of architecture, is going to a 90-year-old Indian architect named Balakrishna Doshi. His prime work throughout his career, 70 years, has been in affordable housing. He describes architecture as a living organism, and I would have to say I have to agree with him. This notion that we're making objects of immortality is not how I think some of us see our mission, and I think we're seeing a broader and broader interest in the architecture profession trying to do what it can to become more diverse, more inclusive, and more attentive to under-resourced communities.
Great. Chris?
From the development point of view, kind of to my earlier comment, I think the future is going to be about creating great places. It's not so much about how you're getting there. I think the technology will solve that. Ideally, we're spending less time getting places, and we're spending more time at the origins and the destinations, the places we want to be, and we want to be with the people that we want to be with. And so that there's a renewed focus on placemaking, and that's the driver of the business, so to speak, and that it's creating those great cities that are resilient, that are looking back to the great European walkable cities. Those cities have gone through all of these paradigm shifts, and they are still the desired types of places that people want to be. And I think we can get back to that kind of thinking about how we develop, how we plan, by kind of stripping away some of these extraneous things and focusing on what are the core things that makes people want to be where they want to be. And I'm hopeful that people don't want to be traveling places. They want to be at the destination. And I think it's our job to create those great places.
Well, I'm going to opine here. As it turns out, I'm an architect, an urban planner, and an urban designer. So I'm completely schizophrenic, or what is it when you have three things? It's schizophrenic or something like that. So I have some thoughts. I have a feeling that we're going to need to focus on systems storytelling in the future, because we are at a point at the juncture of the planet where our problems are systemic, and a lot of the technology we've been talking about are basically systems approaches to solving things. And so, in my mind, we need to bring systems thinking to the systemic problems, and I think the way to bring the public along with us is through storytelling. Most people, when you bring up systems thinking, they glaze over if they don't have a PhD in physics. And so the ability for us as professionals to be able to tell stories to people that are friendly and engaging stories that get them to do things that they wouldn't normally do, I think will be important. I think the way we work is going to be much less siloed and much more interdisciplinary, and dare I even use the term transdisciplinary, where you collaborate with people, and in doing so, you actually change the way you feel about your own profession, and you become a much better professional through this sort of learning forward idea. I think we're going to have to be much better at defining problems than we've ever done before, and now not only can technology help us define problems better and more profoundly, but technology will be part of the problem that we're helping to define, I think, in the future. Because I think, you can't solve problems unless you define them properly. And then I also think we may be, as putting on my architect's hat here, the era of the sort of heroic single-purpose building may be at an end, and we may be thinking about multiple uses, multiple generations for buildings. So the idea of loose fit, long life is probably going to be an important axiom for all of us, not just architects, landscape architects, planners, and developers. So you've kind of heard what we're all thinking. Here's the next question is, what are your clients asking for? Are they in the clueless realm, or are they actually thinking that there's something out there that they need to be on top of? So Chris.
Boy, that's a tough one. I would say, thinking from putting my developer's client hat on, it was a good point made in one of the earlier presentations that, development has to answer to today's market, and so and their lenders are demanding that, and so how things get built is on a much shorter time frame than I think we're talking about, and that's a great challenge. There's definitely a consciousness, and I see it in our work about the need for adaptability, or not so much adaptability, but flexibility and nimbleness, so that we're not locking ourselves into tomorrow's problem, or creating a stranded asset that we can't, that's going to sink us as a business. So I'm definitely beginning to see that. The other great challenge is just as we heard in the earlier panel as well, the rate of change and uncertainty is just unprecedented. When I started my career 20 years ago, we would do market research, and what was going to happen 5 years from now, or even 10 years from now, was pretty predictable. There's trends, and it was pretty easy to do. Now, if you ask us what 6 months out holds, it's almost anyone's guess. And so it really, I think, redefines what we say when we're talking about planning in general, because it's not, I think there's a redefinition that's needed that recognizes that we are not predicting the future when we are putting planning together, that we're not able to model what it's going to look like 20, 30, 40 years from now. I think that's absurd to think that we can do that given how much uncertainty is just happening year to year.
Yeah, yeah. Anyone else want to jump in there?
I'm going to take a pushback slightly on that. Much of the work we do is in the public or government sector, and when they have a bite at the apple, they take it. So the exercise is to design for multi-generations. And that's really a provocative challenge when we think about how much technological change has impacted the building industry, how we use space, and in fact, how buildings perform. One of our clients challenged us last month to be thinking about performance. And that's one of the things that I think all of us can connect with apropos systems thinking. We're asking our built environment to perform better. And that's, I would say, becoming more and more our primary focus in terms of whether it's a 7-year decision, a 20-year decision, or a 75-year decision. We're trying to ensure that there's going to be flexible performance that meets the needs of the users.
Okay. Mary.
Skip over. All right. Being on the transportation side of landscape architecture, our clients are, well, most of our clients are public agencies, and they are, for the most part, pretty savvy. We have a lot of conversations geared around all the new technologies. From the design side, we're not seeing as much of an influence in it. On the planning side, we're seeing a lot of interest in it. We're seeing a lot of RFPs for help with strategy, help with planning, for dealing with AVs, for dealing with a whole host of new technology. From our perspective, it still comes down to making sure that we've got the plans in place for people.
Yeah.
I'm just going to throw this statistic out there. And the only reason I know it is a friend of mine, a dear friend of mine who passed away a few years ago, was disabled. She ended up in a wheelchair at the age of 45, and she told me that she learned that she was expecting to not live past 65, and I said, well, that's ridiculous. You know, you're healthy, you don't smoke, and she said, well, I'm in a wheelchair. The number one predictor of my lifespan is the immobility associated with my wheelchair. So our conversations with our clients are really kind of, I guess as a counterpoint to Chris's on the end, are really about the journey as opposed to the destination. So making sure that that's not forgotten and that we're not still dealing with that in a future world.
Yeah. Before you launch in, I just want to let everyone know we will be taking questions, so start putting some together, and if you line up when Dave's done, if anyone's there, we'll take some questions.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to put on my private consultant's hat, because before 5 years ago, I was a consultant, and one of my big areas of practice was doing comprehensive plans for the public sector, cities, counties, towns, and so I actually picking up on what Mary says. Now I'm observing from APA perspective. I think on the planning side, there's a lot of interest out there, and cities and counties are starting to think about this. And I did a little write up a little thing in the program, and you'll see in there was a study that was done by Eric Guerra at University of Pennsylvania. 3 years ago, he surveyed MPOs, the 25 largest MPOs, and they all said they were thinking about autonomous vehicles, but they weren't doing anything about them yet. They weren't quite sure how to deal with them. The jury was out. I think that's changing now. And I think where it's changing is particularly in mobility plans, and no longer just long-range transportation plans. New mobility plans, things like Seattle's doing, Portland apparently is doing, Austin. So a lot of cities are moving in that direction. I think the next frontier for planners, and one of the things we try to develop in the resources we just put out, is to mainstream that into planning, starting with a comprehensive plan, because that's what sets the values, the goals, the visions for the community. It should be sort of the umbrella and direction for everything else, including functional plans, area plans, district plans. I think there's a lot of work, neat work that can be done at the district, all the way down to the site design and development scale. So I think planners are starting to get it, and we're going to see that happening really rapidly over the next few years.
Great. Question?
Yes. Hi, I'm Conrad. You may remember me from 40 minutes ago.
Yes. I thought you looked familiar.
Yeah. So some of the work I do is on bottom-up urbanism, right? So non-traditional clients. How do your professions view these new clients? How do you see, for instance, the receding governments throughout the world for some of you that work abroad as well? How do you deal with these new types of clients?
I'll give it a try. I think this connects with another point, which I think the architectural profession would really benefit from, is focusing on communication. The better we can communicate with the broader public in their terms, not our terms, in their terms, the better that we're going to be of service to them. And the more we're going to learn. You talk about, Tim, I thought it was great about trans-professional. I think we can serve them if we can connect with them, if we can do everything necessary to understand their issues, not what we project onto them, and allow them to help establish their vision and see ourselves as facilitators of that.
I might add in, we've developed a number of planning frameworks that are actually directed at grassroots folks. And what we found is the biggest challenge is that they often don't have the resources to pay for an expensive consultant. So what we have tried to do is to bring funding to them to do two things. Number one, help them do what they want to do, but also train them in being able to sort of fish for themselves rather than giving them fish. So we have this one grassroots framework called Civic Ecology. Actually, you were part of the session yesterday in our office. So, and the idea is working in communities and actually training them in that technology so that we can be an advisor rather than an everyday consultant, which brings their cost way down. And if you can start to bring in philanthropic funding, so you have to kind of break the typical market system of hiring a consultant who hires a professional and insert other kind of money in there to make the system work for those types of clients.
Can I pile on with
Yeah.
three quick points?
Yeah.
Public engagement is more important than ever, and meaningful public engagement, not just showing people how we fixed their problem and getting their feedback on it, but actually listening to them first and then sitting down to attack problems. Looking at how we take that information and disseminate it. When we developed the NACTO bike design guide and when we did the small town and rural design guide, we tried to make the content easy to download, easy to plug into grant applications, easy to implement from really low budget perspective. We tried to make sure that information got out as far as possible. We're very mission driven. A lot of people thought we were crazy because we were essentially like you said, teaching people to fish, but it made it possible to get a lot more built over a short period of time, which makes all of our lives healthier and better. And then I actually forgot the third thing. Never mind.
Oh, it's okay. It's a senior one.
Tim, I'll just add one quick thing to that, which I think is really important, which is that smaller communities and rural communities they're not getting the attention from all the investment and developer talent that the bigger cities like Portland have. And so that kind of a model is really appropriate and greatly needed in smaller towns where there are people who have great ideas and there are markets there. It's a supply problem and a financing problem, and I'd love to see more of that, not just focused on the cities, but on the smaller and rural communities.
So So I think we have time for one more question before we have to wrap up.
Yes. I'd like to toss out a theory for your engagement, and that is expanding on what David said about planning. I have my doubts about how far the whole storytelling idea would take me with some audiences, but the beauty of planning is that it takes you back to what your goals are. And so if a community says, oh, wow, that's a shiny new toy, let's chase that. But if they compare those things to what they were actually wanting to do when they started the plan, it sort of strips away some of the complexity, as was mentioned very early in this panel. And if you combine that with specificity of terms, you really have a way for a community to find its way through this thicket. So terms like shared mobility really consist of two separate terms. I mean, it's shared ride, meaning strangers in a vehicle at the same time, versus sharing vehicles, which is a totally different thing, which is nice, but it's not as nice as the shared ride. So I think it helps a community focus on and finally find their way back to what they were trying to get out of the technology. So your thoughts?
I'm going to just make one comment. If there's one thing I want all of us to bring away from this, it's all about community values and goals.
I second that, yeah.
Yeah, I don't think you have any argument up here. I think the storytelling can be used in nefarious ways and wonderful ways, and if the story is the essence of the community, it's exactly what you say. Their values and their vision for the future of their community become part of the story, and therefore any shiny object that comes goes through the filter of that story. But if somebody comes in and tells them a story about how great technology is going to be, and they get off track or they haven't identified their essence, bad things happen. So thank you, all of you guys and gals up here, for this great conversation, and let's rock on for the next generations.